Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Soooo, your favorite sewing friend, and I have not seen you guys for a really long time. What have I been doing? Well, I had a baby, so obviously haven't had much time to do anything but look after the baby. And it's been 5 months now since the baby was born, and I'm finally getting into sewing again. So that is very, very exciting for me, and that is why today I'm going to chat to you about the page dress by Elbe Textiles, which is this dress that I'm wearing right now. It has a front button placket. My cat is meowing. Anyway, it has a front button placket, just like all the other dresses that I've been making now, because they all have to be nursing friendly. This one behind me is the zero waist gathered dress by Birgitta Helmesen. Birgitta, yeah. It's a good dress. I'm gonna make another one in black, but today we are talking about the page dress by Elbe Textiles. It has a lot of pin tucks at the front and the back, which is what drew me to the design in the first place. Recently made my own self-drafted dress. Well, it's not really self-drafted, it was like a hack of a random pattern that I found where it had pin tucks, and I was like, yes, the page dress, it has pin tucks. It should be fine. I've done pin tucks before, but this has like a lot of pin tucks. There's like 17 on either side, so 34, and then 34 at the back, so it's a lot of pin tucks, but I did it and it's great, and I shall chat to you about this dress. Oh, and if anyone wants to know like what else I've been doing apart from having a baby, well, I went on some walks around the same loop over and over again because we've been in and out of lockdown forever, and I went to a cafe twice I think, and I went to the beach that one time before the baby was born, and yeah, and the rest of the time I was working until I stopped working to look after the baby. Anyway, on to the video. So as you can see, this dress is made out of a black and white gingham linen that I got from the fabric store. I've been going through a massive gingham phase, which I've been going through a massive gingham phase. Like my past 3 dresses now have just been out of gingham linen from the fabric store, and they have a really nice range, so that's why I've been going back there over and over again to get different colored gingham. I feel like I should stop, but I probably won't, so you'll probably see the next dress in a gingham linen. So I made this dress in a size F, and for the size F you need about 3.5 meters of fabric. You also need 10 1.2 centimeter buttons, so 12mm buttons, and fusible interfacing and some bias binding. So I didn't think at the beginning that I needed to make any adjustments. Obviously the thing that you should probably do when you first make a dress that you're unsure of is to make a toile out of it, and that is also what is recommended by Elbe Textiles. They were like, please make a toile, and I was like, no. So I should have done it and I didn't, and yeah. But basically the adjustments that I had to do after I made the dress, and now that I'm thinking about it in retrospect that I should have done before I made this dress so that I can tell you what to check for, is that I think the F is a little bit, like, just slightly too big for me, and I think it's because my bust is quite large now because I'm nursing my child, so all of my proportions are a little bit off. So the size F fits me and it's great, I still love it, but it's like just like slightly too big, and because it's slightly too big it's obviously a little bit too long. So when I did make the dress I kind of didn't think about that and I just made it, and then when I tried it on I was like, oh, it's extremely long. It's, you know, this dress is meant to be midi length and it was pretty much almost a full length on me. Having said that, that's probably my fault also, because I sort of just like in the measurements of the dress when I was cutting, I was like, oh well, I'll just use up all of this fabric because don't want to waste any, essentially. But what I ended up doing was essentially making it too long. So this is not Elbe Textiles' fault, this is just my fault, and the fact that I was like, no, let's not cut where we are meant to cut, let's just cut all of it and use all of the fabric and of course make it very long. Anyway, it makes no sense. in my brain at the time I thought it was fine, and obviously thinking about it now, no, not very good. So yeah, that was the first thing I needed to do, which was to hem the dress. So I took off like 11 centimeters off the hem to make it a midi length again. Another thing to look out for is that, you know, you're meant to be making a toile, you're meant to be fitting it and stuff. This dress, it has like a sort of like a curve at the hip. So it has like a nice curve at the hip because you've got your pin tucks, and they create the shape to define the waist just a little bit. Like it's still a boxy fit, but it's like just slightly defined. And because of that, there's like a slight curve where the pockets are, and that is, you know, for your hip section. But because I made a size F and I didn't do a toile, I didn't like do all the markings up and stuff and actually fit myself, the curve for me is like lower than my hips, so it like kind of sticks out weirdly. So my tip to you is that you should measure where your pockets are, where your pockets should go, because at the moment now they are like comically low, which always happens to me. I need to remember to like measure where I want to put my pockets. But anyway, it's a little bit low, so I kind of like lean to one side when I'm trying to like put my hand in my pocket. Yeah, so obviously the pocket needs to shift upwards, and so does that hip curve for me, because it's not on the right place. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all the adjustments that needed to be done, like just the hem, like the length of it, and where the hip and pocket meet your actual hip. Okay, so apart from, you know, the aforementioned adjustments that needed to be made beforehand, there are other things during this process of making this dress that I struggled with. Struggle City, as they would say. The first is bias binding. So we've got bias binding around the neckline and the armholes. I've only ever done bias binding like once before, and that was with the Hannah wrap dress by Hand London. It was really confusing to me, that whole process. You know, mind you, that was like maybe 2 years ago in my sewing journey, so it's pretty fresh. This time round, not so bad, but still kind of bad. So with the by Hand London dress, it's a wrap dress and I made it out of black linen, but then also the bias binding was also black. So even if you could see the bias binding on the front side, you wouldn't be able to really see it because it was all black material. But with this one, you know, I should have probably made my own bias binding out of the gingham linen, but I was too lazy, so I didn't do it. And I just used normal bias binding, which is just a black tape that I found. I think it's birch. When you're doing bias binding, everything has to be tucked in to the back so that you actually don't see the binding on the front side. So at one point, like this section was good, but then the other section wasn't, and it was because it wasn't folded in enough when I was sewing it. So my solution to you is, when you're doing your bias binding, just to keep pressing. So, you know, attach the bias binding, right sides together, sew it, and then like press, and then edge stitch, like understitch it, press, keep press. And then when you fold it in, press again, and then another fold, press. So just press everything, just keep pressing, because pressing makes things a lot easier and smoother when you're sewing. I often obviously don't press enough, and everything is always that little bit more wonky. Yes, so tip, press, keep pressing, press. Press. Another mistake I made was that when I was trimming back the seam, after sewing the bias binding to the armholes and the neckline, you know, you trim back the seam. And every time I trim back seams, I always somehow manage to clip like the real fabric or some part of the fabric that should not be clipped. And this time, luckily, I only clipped a little bit of the bias binding on like the other side. And it was very traumatic still. But luckily it wasn't actually like this real fabric. But yes, the solution is to, firstly, one, probably use smaller scissors when you're trimming back seams, but also be extremely careful. But I also saw that Helen's Closet was using these weird scissors, like duckbill scissors. I think they're meant for embroidery purposes, but they look like, I think they're good for trimming back seams as well, because essentially that duckbill section is meant to push aside the lower part of the fabric so that you don't accidentally snip it. So I bought a pair, obviously, because I was like, anything to help me snip things without snipping the wrong thing would be good. So yes, just be careful when you're trimming back seams, because I had to then like hand sew like the rip that I made. Okay, so another thing was pin tucks. These pin tucks, obviously this whole dress, the whole point of it is the pin tucks. And I think my pin tuck placement was good on this side. Wait, no, good on this side, but not good on the other side, because this side, it's all even, like there's like a good amount of gap between the armhole and the last pin tuck. But then on this side, for some reason, the pin tucks stretch over to the armhole. So I either, one, did not mark out the pin tucks properly on the fabric and then sewed them in evenly, or two, when I was putting the pattern pieces on the fabric once the pin tucks had been sewn in, they were probably slightly off. But most likely, I think I probably just didn't mark it in right, or sew it with the right amount of seam allowance. So yes, be very careful with your pin tuck placement and your seam allowance and everything, and make sure it's all very even for every single pin tuck, because, or else you will end up having like slightly skewed pin tucks on your dress. Another thing that went wrong with the dress was the side splits. So this dress has side splits on the side, like side vents, and mine look really weird. So firstly, they don't really sit right, and they kind of bulge out a bit, and they like poke out funny, like they're kind of split, when really they should be hanging nice and straight. And I think the problem is because when you do this pattern, you have to sew in the pin tucks first, and then you place the pattern on top of it. And you're meant to place the pattern on top of it and kind of like draw around the pattern so that you can cut it out properly, because the pin tucks only stop midway down your waist, and then the rest of it's just like fabric that kind of billows out. So when you're placing your pattern pieces on the fabric, you kind of have to push the skirt in so that's all like even. And you know, I was doing my best, okay? I was trying my best to put everything in place, and when I was tracing it out with, marking it out with my water soluble pen, it was pretty rough, like very, very roughly drawn out. So I am not surprised actually that my side slits turned out terrible, just the worst side slits ever. Because when you do side splits, it's like bleh, and then there's like a little kick, and then it goes out again. So my kicks for the side splits were not even on either side. One was even and the other one wasn't. So yeah, obviously they all kind of turned out a bit crap, especially like, when you're folding, you fold it, you press, then you fold up the hem, you press, and then you're meant to like, sew around, and everything just like, as soon as you start pressing and folding, I knew that it was just not working because I had cut it out wrong and wonky, but there was no going back because I didn't want to make it worse, so I just kind of went with it, and the result is having weird looking side splits. Solution: obviously be extremely careful when you are laying out your pattern pieces and tracing them out onto the fabric. Make sure it's very even, just make everything even essentially, and as close to the pattern pieces as possible. The next thing I was confused about was the hem. So the hem of this dress confused the heck out of me for some reason. I could not comprehend what was happening in both the written instructions and the little diagram that came with it. It was like, sew here, and I was like, where? And then flip up, where? Who? What? Blah. And I kind of was just looking at it for like maybe half an hour. I was looking at it, and then I was like, aha, I've got it, only to realize that it was wrong. Hello, it's just me editing Surya. I just realized that this part of the video is very confusing because I was trying to explain it and then I got confused again. But basically, when I was doing the hem, I had the foresight enough to use a test piece of fabric first, and thank goodness I did, because I thought I had it and then it was very wrong. So basically, you're meant to fold in the side splits twice, press, and then fold the hem up twice and press, and then you unfold it all, and then for the hem you fold it up right sides facing, and on the innermost line, which is on the innermost side split line, you would sew down a vertical line. So I didn't know that. Well, I didn't realize that until later. Because the whole point of sewing that is that, you know, you would sew it vertical and then you would flip out the hem to the right sides and then everything would be a nice right angled side split hem situation. But I didn't know that. So I was confused by by the very clear diagram that was there, but I was confused by it. And instead I sewed a horizontal line. What rubbish. And of course, when you sew a horizontal line on a hem, there is no way in the world that you can essentially flip that out to be the right size up because you've sewn it shut. So yeah, that was what I did and that was wrong. So what you need to do is just remember, hem, fold right sides together and then sew a vertical line on that side split that is the closest to the center front. Okay, so my button placket was also sewn in weird. It's figuring out the hem and the side split and how that, like, you know, flips out. I would have understood, but I didn't, and I made it worse. So not only was my, like I said before, just earlier on, how everything was slightly off because I had essentially just cut out all the fabric as opposed to stopping where I was meant to stop for the skirt section. I did that, but I cut out the right amount of fabric for the button placket. So of course that was shorter than my center front. And I was confused by that and I couldn't remember why that happened. And so I just added on more fabric, which is fine. You just add more fabric onto the button placket, it's fine. I just added another square, made it longer, but then I didn't make it long enough. So I made it exactly the length of this center front, which is wrong. So a button placket, obviously, you know, you want to enclose the raw edges, which is at the top and the bottom. And so to do that, you would need extra fabric, like just a little bit of an overhang at the top and the bottom. Didn't realize that. I sewed it in with exactly the right amount, and then I tried to flip it out like you would have to conceal the thing, and it wasn't working, and I was like, why is this happening? And so instead of unpicking it, I trimmed it back and then was like, oh no. Yeah, so that was a really, highlight of my life, I think. Highlight? No, you would say the low light of my life. The downhill motion, the bottom of the pond where I was like drowning in confusion. So yeah, that was bad. But yeah, you know, I salvaged it. But like, if you obviously ripped open the button placket on this dress, you would see like a bunch of weird cuts that are not meant to be there. But I managed to conceal it anyway. So I added more fabric to the button placket after realizing what I had done, and then, you know, sewed it in, trimmed it properly, flipped it out, and it turned out slightly better than before. Well, it worked. And I was like, phew. So that was that. And then, yeah, after that debacle, you have to top stitch the button placket. And I did not top stitch very well. So solution, like tip to you for this button placket is, one, obviously cut out the right amount based on the pattern piece for both your front bodice and your button placket, so it works. And secondly, when you're top stitching, make sure you top stitch very close to the edge. Instead, I didn't really do that. I was thinking that I was doing it, but I was really quite not very close, so it's like very weird and wonky. You can see, yeah, just like top stitch very close to the edge and you'll have a nice button placket that is nicely top stitched, as opposed to one that is like real weird looking and wonky. Okay, so those are all the mistakes that I made. I hope running through them has given you some pointers on what not to do and what to look out for. I can't remember how many times I've probably made the same mistakes over and over again, and how I should probably make a toile every time. But I do not, because I am lazy. So in conclusion, despite all the things that went wrong with this dress, I very much enjoyed making it. It has a lot of pin tucks, which, you know, I was like, pin tucks, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, they'll be fine. I can do pin tucks. Pin tucks are fine, I've done them before, man. But if you're doing like 34 on each side, front and back, it can be a little bit time consuming. I watched Sense and Sensibility, the one with Alan Rickman and Emma Thompson, I kid you not, I think like 50 times. During the course of making this dress, when I was sitting there just like making pin tucks. But it was therapeutic because I very much love that movie anyway. Not that I could hear it over the sound of my sewing machine, but you know, background noise, it's great. So be prepared for a long haul of pin tucks and like learning how to do a hem with side splits. I learned how to do a button placket again, even though I've done it before, but I forgot. And bias binding around armholes and necklines. I really liked learning that properly again. So yeah, overall, even though I was like in struggle city making this dress, really enjoyed the process, and I think it turned out pretty good. Like, to me, it looks really good. Obviously I can see all the flaws that I made with this dress, but I also don't really care. So I would think that this dress, with all the things that has to be done to it, would be like an intermediate level kind of sewing adventure. But if you're a beginner sewer and you've made some dresses and now you've watched this video on what not to do and what to look out for, I think it should be fine. Like, just make a toile first, and you'll like a test run first, and you'll figure it out and it'll be great. So I hope this video has been insightful to you and has helped you pick up some tips and tricks for your sewing journey if you decide to make this dress. And if you do, please comment below and let me know how it went. And if you like this video and you would like to see more of me in the future and my sewing adventures, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.